even though people are still coming in, we will start now. First of all, welcome. And we are very happy to see you here in such high numbers at the Personal Information Smarten Up Lunch Conference. I'm Monica Nica, and I am part of the team that organized this conference, meaning the trainees currently doing their stage at the EDPS. Some housekeeping things before we really start. As you should already know, this is being web streamed. So the ones that want to take the floor and speak on the microphones, they should hit the red button by the microphone. And they should not forget to hit it again when they are done speaking, because the cameras follow the sound in the room. Also, we have our hashtag. As you can see it, you can spot it around the room. It's EDPD 2015. It stands for European Data Protection Day 2015. If you were not aware, today is the European Data Protection Day. And our new team of supervisors have several events throughout the day, but I've heard rumors that this is their favorite one. So if you don't feel like speaking, but you still want to get some answers from our honored guests, just use the hashtag and we'll get the questions to the speakers. Also, the ones of you who got the Wi-Fi papers, please sign them, write your name in clear, and do not take them with you at home. We need them back. So leave them on the desks before you leave. And one last but not least thing, please turn your phones, your smartphones, your mobile phones on the silent mode. I am sure, or at least I hope, that everyone is already aware of the topic of this conference. And having the focus on smart devices and the risks to data associated when we use them seems only fitting in today's, I hope I was heard until this point, seems only fitting in today's daily lives, considering how, let's say, passionate we all are about our smartphones, and maybe not so much our privacy and our personal data. As mentioned in the program, the conference has two parts, and during the first 45 minutes, we have the opportunity to engage with the new team of supervisors and ask them questions, while in the second part, the panel of experts will delve more into the technicalities of the topic. Mr. Giovanni Buttarelli is the new European Data Protection Supervisor, and he will introduce us to the main challenges of the big data world. He occupies this position since December 2014, while between 2009 and 2014 he was the Assistant European Data Protection Supervisor, and he was also the Secretary General to the Italian Data Protection Authority between 1997 and 2009. Mr. Wojciech Wiewiórowski is the new Assistant European Data Protection Supervisor as well from December 2014, and his professional background includes the position of Inspector General for the protection of personal data at the Polish Data Protection Authority, and he was also Vice Chairman of the Working Party Article 29 group. And he will offer insights into DPA's main concerns over mobile applications. Following their presentations, there will be a Q&A session. So at this point, I would just like to give the floor to Mr. Giovanni Buttarelli.
Thank you for the introduction. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to this lunch conference at the occasion of the 9th Data Protection Day in Europe. It's a day where we celebrate the importance of these sectoral kind of rules. This celebration was introduced in 2006 by the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. Why? Because on the 28th of January 1981 they opened the signature for the Convention 108, one of the main pillars in this area. Though we are web streamed, I can easily admit it's much more interesting to be with you, promising youngsters, rather than with challenging journalists or perhaps boring lawyers. I will not admit that outside this room, but it's a pleasure to be with you for at least 40 minutes. So my colleague and I will be extremely brief. We'll speak a candid, sincere, plain and short language, and we would like to immediately interact with you on some topics. Data protection is on top of the EU agenda, and also within various member states, but it's still something unclear to many. I'm not sure that 35 years later, the introduction of this notion, data protection as a notion, still reflects the complexity of the issue. It gives the idea that we are simply focusing on information to protect them, while the discussion is much wider. Privacy is perhaps a much easier notion. It gives the idea to the protection of the intimate sphere. But data protection is something still on the cloud, and we would like to discuss with you how fascinating is this area, which is horizontal, which is pervasive. It relates to everybody in the public and the private sectors, processing information about others, and everybody has information about others. And we would like to share with you our modern vision, because we have been appointed to be the EU ambassadors in the world about the new approaches from the European Union. We have been asked to think global, to be more conversant with new technologies, and to see how traditional principles concerning the protection of our fundamental rights and freedoms can fit into the big data world. Why we put big data on top of today's agenda here, and what it means big data. There are various notions, but big data basically means growing capability of new software and hardware devices to capture, elaborate, extrapolate potentially unlimited amount of information in multiple ways and faster than ever. It will be soon extremely difficult to process this information by using standard management tools or traditional processing operations. The first and second generation of national and international provisions in this area was focused largely on unsolicited communications, profiling for commercial purposes, advertisements, notice and choice individually collected by single controllers, spam, and so forth and so on. 15, 20 years later, we are approaching a reform. Our world is entirely new. There are also some perspectives in terms of prosperity, well-being, and also significant benefits for citizens. But our life will be increasingly managed via smartphones, tablets, computers, and although they will not collect, and when I say they, we need to identify who, but a large number of players around the world in a data-driven economy will process information about you without identifying directly you, but managing information where you are directly, indirectly identifiable. And they will be interested in knowing what you do, what you like, to predict your behavior, to anticipate your requests, to better plan their own business, and not in all cases this will have a negative impact on you. They will profile you increasingly. They will get a benefit. We call this information personal information because they relate to us. But the tendency from the big data players around the world is exactly the opposite, to make as much as possible benefit from what relates to you without anything in exchange apart from apparently free of charge services which are offered, which we all appreciate, social networks included, where you apparently do not pay, but you are charged a lot since what you give in exchange has an extraordinary value. So we will see soon new methods for processing personal information in a very sophisticated way, new algorithms. If all of us now approach the same web page in Internet by using each of us different smartphones and tablets at the same right moment by using the same browser, we will have a lot of different results today, not speaking about tomorrow. Why? Because it builds on the analysis of your preferences, your behavior, an advanced use of cookies. This may have a positive impact on you. If the computer answers in a way you like more, this is something you may appreciate. But you may be also surprised to see that the output is too much personalized, that they discover a lot of things about you. And this is therefore something you may analyze in terms of increased level of sophistication, pervasiveness, and therefore how we will be profiled in the next future is something we should consider. Personal data have been defined as today's currency, the modern oil. And it is not only an issue of interferences in the private sphere, but it's basically a balance of powers. Big data is a source for big improvements, but also to introduce a lot of asymmetry in between single users and big players. So we would like to see how traditional principles may be effective, why this personal data should only be beneficial for a limited number of players and not for everybody. And we would like to discover how the phenomenon will run. So this is just a short introduction, since the killer application of today's lunch conference is to build on your questions. Then, in addition to big data, we thought that it would be nice to discuss with you how you manage your life via smartphones, via tablets. Some mature adults used to say that we need to educate you, youngsters, and encourage awareness on the consequences of you passing information to social networks, service providers, and so forth and so on. I think this is not the right approach. I think you very well know much more than them how the systems work. So I think as terrific users, you may be very, very helpful to make a test on how we are working on these principles. So don't be shy in submitting provocative questions, and please consider that the second part of today's discussion before the panel relates to exactly mobile applications, including apps. And my dear colleague Wojciech would like to say something about it.
Yeah, actually. Oops, not. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I would like to, first of all, to thank all of you to come here to this conference. That's really a wonderful thing to meet the people who are actually introducing new technologies in the life of the European institutions. As Giovanni said a while ago, you actually know much more about the practical use of the devices that we usually call the mobile or smart devices than we do. And you actually take them also to the place where you work. So this bring your own device model, which is more and more visible in the activities of the European institution, is something that I will address today. Especially, I will address actually three things only. The first is, what is a smart device, which might be sometimes a little bit surprising for you. The second thing, what are the concerns of the data protection authorities? And the third thing, what is the kind of cyber hygiene that we should use in everyday life? A lot of the practical things will be later on also touched in the panel itself. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear data subjects, this is data about you. This is not something which we found in the coal mine. This is not something that we found on somebody's devices, somebody's servers, somewhere in the world. No, this is the data about you yourself and those people whom you are contacting with, no matter if you contact with them professionally or you contact with them for the private reasons. So you always have to have in mind the fact that all the devices like that are not collecting the information, they are collecting information about you and information about the other people who are somewhere around. And what is the mobile device? Well, of course, this is the mobile device. Yeah, this is something that we usually remember about, something that we say is a smart device that we use. That is, of course, also the device that you take from the place where you live to the place where you work, or you are getting it from your employer as something to be used for professional reasons. And if you are taking something which is your private property, then you are using it both for the personal reasons and for professional reasons at the same time. But this is the mobile device. This is the mobile device. More and more cars actually have the computers, which are much more smarter than any other device that I used when I was at my student times, or even later on when I started my professional activity. And I will come back to these cars in a while to show what are the problems that we may have with synchronizing the information between the mobile devices that we use. That might be the mobile device. What is it? That's lens that we use just to see the world a little bit better. But you can ask, what are these small rings that are on the land? But this is actually the land that was introduced to the market last year, and it checks the level of the sugar in the blood of the person. That's a wonderful device, actually, because that's the device that, for those people who have the problem with the sugar in the blood, allows them not to check 3 times a day what is the level of the sugar, but they can have a line on how it was during all the day, and they can access it with the mobile, with other mobile devices like their smartphone. They can check it from the laptop. They can use it at the place where they have the stationary computer. But of course, the question that we may ask to this is the question: who can access this data? For whom this data is collected? Because if it is collected for the person whose lens are, that's not a problem. If it is accessible to the doctor that was allowed to do that, yeah, why not? That's a perfect solution. But you might be surprised that the manufacturer of this device is Google. So Google is also somebody who is interested in the data like that for different purposes, for the purposes that might be fully legitimate and that we can also agree with, but also for the purposes that might sweep out of the control of ourselves. If your employer knows this data, you might be a little bit more afraid. If your insurer knows this data, that's also something that might be surprising for you. Well, the most funny thing for me, well, I'm a father of the child who is just 10 months old. Well, electronic nappies. this data was not collected, as it's said in this advertisement. 360 million nappies changed every day, and nobody has collected this data. That might be the mobile device, actually, that is sending the information outside. And if you then go to the some future applications and some future uses of the mobile devices in health, you may find much more interesting ways that the very personal data, which is the health data, is going to be used. And that's also why the European Data Protection Supervisor is going to publish the opinion on the mobile health in the nearest weeks. Well, I put in the presentation, which will be available for you, the information about the concerns and also the guidelines that the data protection authorities made towards the smart applications producers, the developers of the applications, and also to the shops which are providing us with these solutions. Not only in order to show you that we are doing something, but also in order to convince you to check if these things are actually done in the application that you use. Romain will tell you a little bit more about the practical activities that data protection authorities did in order to find out what is going on with the applications all over the world. So let me then summarize with these things about the hygiene. Well, two smart devices, one to the other, the tablet and the car. If you use the tablet and you want to synchronize the data between the tablet that you use and the computer in the car in order to hear the same music through the audio system in the car, you have to remember what the word synchronizing means. You actually know that. It means that the data from one device and the data from the other device will be actually the same. So it also means that the data from your tablet will be then transferred to the computer in the car, including the calendar, including the list of addresses, including the list of people that you are dealing with, if this is stored on the tablet. And every time you synchronize the data because you want to hear the music and you are clicking yes, yes, okay, yeah, I agree, give this music, I want to hear this music. Remember, you are actually allowing the person in the garage of the car to access the same data you have on the tablet with the same cable he would use to check why the car works or not. Because that's the same computer. These are two smart devices that you use at the same time. And of course, I don't need to tell you that there are some additional things that you have to remember about. That is the computer that was used by one of the high officials of one of the member states when he was presenting his speech to the parliament in his country. And the picture has been done from the balcony of the parliament. Well, I believe he had only his speech at the computer. But of course, this is not the right place where the password and the login for that shall be stored. Yeah? Remember, passwords are like underwear. Yeah? You should not give it to anybody. You should not leave it at the place where it's accessible, and you should change it very often. Yeah? These are the things to remember. Otherwise, you will go to the situation like those people, for example. That's the picture from one of the TV news, and there in this pink thing, you have the login and the password to the system, which is going to be used to send the helicopters, the rescue helicopters in the country. Yeah? I don't know what scares me the most. If it scares me that this data is kept the way like this, if it scares me that the TV people didn't see what they have in the camera, or that there are the people who made the screenshot of that, there are the people who are watching the news and they see the things like that. I would not see this login and the password because I'm watching the news. And they are, especially the young people, who are looking at the world completely different. They are not if you come to the office, they don't see the flowers, they don't see the books, they don't see the wonderful table that you have. They are looking for an information that they can use to access your data in the future. And this is not only the problem of this country, and not only the problem of this situation. Here you have, of course, another very well-known person who just visited the army base he was serving in, and once again the password and the login on the screen. Also here, directly on the computer, here the information how to access it. And here is the information from the floods that were in the UK last winter. Once again, very strong password to use. But unfortunately, it's visible in the TV, so it's not that safe anymore. And these are the passwords to the tablets. They are hashed. But the funny thing about it is they were found on the pen drive, which was lost by the FBI agent. And once again, I don't know what is more stressy, the fact that they can lose the pen drive with the information which is not 100% secure. Yeah, I guess this guy is not an officer of FBI anymore. Or the fact that this data is in the possession of the FBI. Well, it's not maybe that much surprising since Snowden revelations, but these are the passwords to the iPads which were used in one of the European countries. So let me say in the end, if you use smart devices, in the bring your own device model, you probably shall remember the motto of my hometown, which is Gdansk in northern Poland. And the motto of the city is Nec temere, nec timide, which means without a fear, but not too brave. So, yes, of course, we will use it. Yes, of course, we will bring it. Yes, of course, it's nice, funny, and first of all, very useful for the professional use, but let's not be too brave with using it for all the purposes that we want. Thank you.
So you see how we are approaching a smart way to communicate. We too are a little bit brave. So don't be yes man, yes girl when you would like to access to information at any cost. Think about it. So we have 15 minutes for Q&A before approaching the panel. I'm monitoring you. You are, if we exclude the DPS people, 70 and speakers, 78. So there is a virtual prize for the one making the most provocative question. You will assign the prize in another stage. So who would like to break the ice? It could be also a comment instead of a question. The prize will be assigned as well.
Hello. Pedro Malaquias, European Commission.
Name, surname, name of your mother, father, grandmother, and password, please.
Pedro Malaquias, trainee in the European Commission. You have made a short reference to Edward Snowden revelations, and it made it seem that it was limited to the FBI. What about Europe? Is our data safe from the European authorities, from the European countries?
Oh, you want to win the prize, huh? Surveillance is an activity that should take place to preserve security and integrity, the public order. So it's quite normal and indispensable. The question is that it's an activity to be performed on the basis of a transparent framework. So the European Court of Human Rights has condemned certain countries for the invasiveness of this activity because of the lack of transparency. Citizens should know what intelligence services could do depending on the seriousness of the risk. then intelligence services also cooperate each other. And we understand from unofficial sources that few of the European of countries of the European Union cooperate with third countries with stricter approaches. All these actions should be consistent with the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. The European Union is not competent for intelligence. This is outside the competence. But in a decision, an opinion we adopted last year, we say that in case there is a massive surveillance against EU citizens, then there is an issue for the European Union. And the exception for security, in the sense that it's not part of EU competence, does not relate to the security of the third country. If there is a third country exceeding, the limits we have to protect our values by monitoring individuals in the EU, then there is space for an action. So 18 months after the first Snowden revelation, other allegations, we have only partial admissions, but we have a general sense of what happened. And my institution said recently that we are still waiting for an answer, meaning actions. The summit of the heads of states and government has established twice the need to reinforce our values, so the data protection reform is the first step, but something else is needed, and we are working a lot. To conclude, the European Union is competent to deal with security in one member state only if this action may have an impact on the values of the EU in general terms. If something purely national, this is something to be analysed at national level. Sorry for focusing on the legal aspects, but here the legal dimension has a value. So you are in good position for the prize, but there are competitors, I see.
So my question, Anna Panchevska, I'm an intern for G+, and my question is for Mr. Brutalirli and Mr. Wierchowski. I'm sorry. So how does the work of the European Data Protection Supervisor and his assistant relate to, for example, ongoing legislative processes like the General Data Protection Regulation? Do you get calls for advice, technical advice from members of Council or Commission? So that's what I was interested in. Maybe since you were the chair for the Article 29 group, I was interested in how their work relates to the creation of the whole block of legislation that is related to data protection. And maybe if you have time, your opinion on the Data Retention Directive.
Okay, we may invite you at lunch because to answer to your question will require, at least 1 hour and a half. Trying to squeeze the answer in 4 minutes. We are not only responsible to ensure that EU institutions comply with data protection principles when they process personal information, but we need to ensure that they respect these values when they adopt hard and soft legislation. Till now, the position of the DPS has been the one of an influential advisor, but we would like to do more. So by the 2nd of March, we will adopt a strategic plan for our 5-year mandate, where Wojciech and I will identify how we would like to approach the key priorities for the next 5 years, and the data protection reform is on top of that. We will not issue other opinions to simply support and check what is to be changed. We will do more proactively. We will identify solutions, and we would like to be influential at the right moment, which is the trilogue. The trilogue is a negotiation involving Commission, Council and Parliament. So we used the Council to conclude its first reading by June, and therefore we will land with specific solution, not by a technical viewpoint, as you said, but by focusing on substance. This reform will last for at least 2 decades, and in 15 years our world will be entirely different. 15 years means a century, and therefore we need to ensure that these principles will fit into the modern society. And then we need to not to lower the current safeguards, but to make certain provisions flexible enough to resist to the obsolescence of new technologies. So thanks to our background, because we both come from long-term experiences at national level, so we know what happens also locally. We would like to see how this principle will be effective in practice. We will be providing the Secretariat of the new network of national data protection authorities, and therefore we would like to facilitate the way in which they cooperate. On data retention, I think the right comment is in the speech we gave yesterday before Libe. You will find it in our website in half an hour, so you can focus on this point. Yes, please.
Let me add that there is a very practical help that we try to give. You ask if we are present in this discussion, what Giovanni has been presenting to the DAPIX committee, which is the committee of the Council, which is dealing with data protection reform last Monday, when he presented our opinion on one of the parts of the regulation which is right now under the discussion. And yesterday, when the orientation discussion about PNR has happened and the other anti-terrorist measures happened in the LIBE committee, it was also our opinion was also presented. And you ask about the working party of Article 29. Working parties sometimes give an opinion to stages of the discussion which are either in the Parliament or in the Council. But you have to also to remember that the national data protection authorities are advising national governments in different sense, because there are the countries where at Council the data protection authority actually is present. There are the countries where the experts from the data protection authority are advising during the council, during the meetings of the council, and there are the countries where this discussion is done on the national level only.
Anyway, the challenge is to be an independent institution, but not isolated, to interact without predicating a distance, but preserve our integrity, because we are not the legislator, and we are part of certain court cases where the validity of certain measures are challenged. So it's a mix of dynamic approaches. I see position for the prize. So who would like to challenge him? Yes, and then you second. Be brief. We will be extremely brief.
Okay, extremely brief. Are you able to make data protection more user-friendly? For example, all the terms and conditions are not read by users, so you actually don't know what you give permission to, well, to read and to access and to use even. So if you are in this position, are there any plans to do this?
Of course. If you see the statement, the first one of the new team in our website is that we would like to make data protection easier, less bureaucratic, and digital, meaning user-friendly. And this is relevant for provisions. This is relevant for requirements, for notice and choice, but also for technical solutions. Wojciech would like to tell you something about IPEN.
No, that's...
yeah, okay. We will come back to the technical dimension, how to make data protection user-friendly via technologies, not by legal...
Building upon what you said about the March strategic plan and probably also the technical solution, I'm aware that in the US they are, the MIT is currently still under experimentation phase, the so-called personal data store, which is an intermediate layer between every citizen, and the so-called big players, anyone who is interested in collecting their own data. And how it works is basically all the data pass through this intermediate layer in a centralized way, and the big player are only able to ask questions. They are notified to the user, so the user agree or not to disclose answer, not raw data. And something similar is also under experimentation in the UK. Is there anything at the EU level from this point of view?
Not yet, as far as I know. This is an exercise which may be relevant in terms of controllership, in terms of processing modality, but doesn't change the general point, the fact that big data will be increasingly invasive, that this information are of a personal nature, and therefore that a clear platform is to be identified. Perhaps it will be influential to reduce the number of people being able to access to identifiable individuals, but it's just one of the options. It doesn't change the big picture. Anyway, it's an interesting exercise, and we hope in the course of our future missions in the US to have a chance to speak with them. He's challenging you with the question. Okay. Yeah.
Adrian Heyer.
You have a unique option, huh?
Unique option.
It's likely to be the last but one question.
Okay, what are you doing to avoid data monopolies or big players that make use of most of the data that is being processed and that are becoming too big, that control the whole market, whereas other and new players don't have even the chance to compete against them? So how is Europe trying to rise competition with data processors, and what is done to make sure that there are not huge monopolies that benefit from the new development?
Good question. Antitrust policies, consumer policies, data protection policies till now have been silos, not interacting each other, three different words. And last year we adopted a preliminary opinion to allow all these people to work together and see how data protection could be better embedded into antitrust policies and consumer policy. We are not in charge of the antitrust dimension, but we increasingly think that the data protection dimension is extremely relevant for their decisions. So it will not be the EDPS taking position on to split or not Google as a search engine, but the monopolies and the increasing appetite in merging different databases will be extremely relevant. So we started this discussion with positive feedback from relevant entities in FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the US, and the European Commission services. You will find a specific web page in our website, including a last pitch of Thursday last week. I gave at the privacy platform here in Brussels for an update, with some tips and suggestions for the recommendation, for the legislator, for operators, and also for European Commission authorities dealing with very important pending cases. The last one. So you win or you lose.
Hi, Sophia Harrington, trainee at DG DevCo.
DG?
DevCo.
Okay.
You mentioned that we should change our passwords often. At the moment, companies such as Apple have already patented technology that relies on your fingerprint, something we can't change. to access our own personal data. Should we be concerned about the further development of biotechnologies like this in the field of data protection? And is that on the radar of the data protection supervisor in the EU?
We definitely shall stay technology neutral, but we would like to keep an eye on the real free choice that is given to the consumer. Because if the biometric solutions are the only solutions that you can use, then we have to be a little bit scared. If this is an option that you can use, then this is simply up to you to decide if you are a well-informed person what actually will be done with your data. Where fingerprinting is actually going out of the market at the moment. What is going into the market is so-called finger vein. So the information about the blood streams inside the finger, which makes it much more reliable, and apart from that it's harder to copy it, actually, to copy the template. And the very good example of how we can approach to this subject was the problem of the ATM biometric machines. They are still not present in Belgium, but they are already present in some countries around Europe, and not for the VIP users, but for those users that are usually forgetting about the credit cards or bank cards, and but they have their finger with them all the time. And if this is done as an option, and you can use the traditional way of dealing with the ATM machine, but you can also use biometrics, then it's something that we can say, well, if you did the good privacy impact assessment, if you are sure that it's secure, then it's simply up to the person to decide. But what we have to be really very careful about is the genetic data. Because when the genome will come into the problem of authorization, then this is the data that we will never change. We can change everything. We can be supported by the police and the high authorities of the country, changing our names and information about ourselves, but will not change genome. So with genome we have to be extremely careful.
Thank you all. It's now time to leave you in good hands, meaning Christian Herkert and the youngsters that in the EDPS garage every day run the machine. So it was a pleasure. I think it's definitely an initiative to repeat where possible. The distinguished chair of the virtual jury has established that the two guys ex aequo are the winners, so you are entitled to get an EDPS USB from our team. They don't know that they should give you, but now they are very well informed. Sorry for leaving, but I think it's better to you see different faces, different voices. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, why not?
We need to fix the name tag. So, now begins the fun part, and the even more fun part. So I'm Peter Kraus, and I'm going to be the moderator of the panel. And first of all, I would like to welcome our three panelists. Okay, then I'll try this one. Sounds much better. So to my right is Romain Robert. His name is already confusing, but that's also how you can protect your personal data, by obscuring it. So Romain Robert is officer in the Policy and Legislation Unit of the EDPS. and he has been working for the Belgian Data Protection Authority and is focusing on the law part. And he was also a researcher at the Research Center in Law, Technology and Society at the University of Namur, and he focused on e-commerce and electronic communications and data protection law. The youngster in the middle is Fidel Santiago. He's a technology and security officer at the Data Protection Supervisor Office, and he has gathered experience and knowledge when he was working for the Commission in the field of cybersecurity and at the Valencian Conselleria de Sanitat, if that was pronounced correctly, and Fidel is member of the ISACA Task Force on Privacy. And to the outer right is Christian Horchert, better known as Fukami, and he lives in Brussels right now and works as a policy analyst for the Renewable Freedom Foundation, and he is member of the Chaos Computer Club, which is one of the oldest civil liberties and rights groups focused on the digital world in Europe. And his general work focuses on freedom of information, data protection, ICT security and safety, as well as legislation regarding code exploits and crypto-related issues. So, since we're all here to talk about smart devices, for me personally, the first question that I would ask if I would have a smart device is actually, what is the biggest threat that this device poses to my personal data and to my privacy? So maybe to be sure to understand what we're talking about, first we should establish what is personal data, like specifically. Could you answer that, Roman?
I try to, because it's a complicated question, but well, what you should know is that personal information, the personal data that are regulated under the current directive, which is the legal text that we use on an everyday basis, personal information and personal data are supposed to be, legally speaking, as any information relating to a person that can be identified or a person that is already identified. What does it mean? It means that not only the name and the surname that you're using every day is supposed to be a personal information. On your smartphone, for example, because it's the example that we are taking today, the MAC address, the IP address, the email address, all those information with a unique identifier are supposed to be personal information. But not only the information that can help to identify you is supposed to be personal information. All other information then can relate to you, such pictures, the videos, the emails, the content of the email address, the pictures that you took like last year for the holidays and you just put on the cloud, pictures for other people that you're putting on the cloud are supposed to be personal information. So you may realize that when we are talking about mobile application and smartphones, we are talking actually about personal information. So it is I think the essence of the discussion that we are going to have, we're going to have here. And the last element that I would like to stress is that, of course, on a smartphone, you know that you also may use and choose to use an alternative ID, which might not be your name or your surname. For example, the Apple unique ID, I'm sure you know about this one. But you have to know that privacy is not only about your name and your surname. Privacy is also trying to protect you from the information that you did not choose to share with other people. As you know, information is power. So maybe it's important to think twice before we choose or not to share this information with people that we don't know. And those people might not only be Google, your government, your parents, your schools, but it might be people that you don't even have, that you didn't even hear about like the advertisers and all these companies would just try to have access to your information. So just to remind that privacy is not only about your name and your surname, but about all those personal information that are collected to your smartphone and that might be shared with people that you know and maybe that you don't know.
Okay.
I'm hoping that it was not very
I hope so too, but that's for the audience to decide. So thank you for that. So is this, from your perspective, the biggest threat to my personal data on my smart device, or what do you think?
Am I maybe answer by a question? How many of you have switched off the Wi-Fi on their smartphone here in the room? None. Only one person has switched off. So have any of the other people read the terms and conditions of the Parliament? Who knows what the Parliament is going to do with your Wi-Fi data transferred through the Parliament services? Is any one of you aware of this? So that maybe, but I'm very happy to have the answer. So maybe the biggest threat is the lack of knowledge from our side about what the third parties, the people that we don't know, because I'm guessing you don't know who is behind the Parliament IT service. What are they doing with your data? So I think the biggest threat for me is the lack of knowledge of what the people that we are using the service of are doing with the data.
Okay. Fukami, what is... Fukami, what is your thought on this? What are your thoughts on this? Like, what's the biggest threat for me as a user of a smartphone?
Yeah, so I come from a more technical perspective. In my point of view, everything which I can change on a phone, which is like software, which means like the operating system or things like that, or like privacy controls, there are lots of things tied to mobile devices which are not easily changeable. And I choose to pick two examples. One is called baseband and the other one is called SS7. So baseband is a processor in phones which is disconnected from the operating system and so not controllable by the user. And this is a so-called system on a chip, so it has like its own RAM, its own processing power, and it is like that part which is connected to the mobile network. So it is a private proprietary component, so it is not open source, it's not very well understood in terms of the security implications, but what we know is from the past that this chip used to be connected to the microphone, so it means someone could send a message which the baseband processor picked up and could turn your microphone on a phone to something which is exposed to the outside without knowing about it, for example, through silent SMS. The new smartphones don't have this feature anymore, but it's still there as a component which is like necessary because this is what connects your phone to the mobile network. But on the other hand, we don't know very much about it. In the moment, there are two things which we do know. One thing is that, for example, Samsung, I think Galaxy phones, that they used to contain a backdoor, like a very obvious backdoor. And the other thing is that it's very hard to see what this chip does. So what modern protection system, for example, on like crypto phones or on replicant Android devices do is like monitoring the energy consumption of this chip to get an idea if and what it actually does. The second thing I would like to talk about is SS7. This is an inter-telco protocol. SS7 stands for Signaling System number 7, and it's an ITU standard. So this is used for inter-telco communication and inside telcos to do stuff, for example, like handover. So if you are moving and you go from one cell to another, you have some sort of like handover. So this is like one part where it's used, but also for handover through other operators. It's used to route SMS. It's used to send geolocations and a couple of more things. And this is actually something which is really, really worrisome, because you can use SS7 to have, for example, call rerouting, which means like someone sends an SMS to your mobile provider and saying, okay, from now on all calls who go to this phone number should go to another one. So there were a couple of very interesting talks during the 31C3. Explaining the protocols and explaining the attack surface. Look for the talks of Tobias Engel and Carsten Nohl, and you will find like very detailed information about that. About baseband, there is a name you should look up called Ralf Philipp Weinmann. He also did a couple of talks on this issue. So the reason why I choose it is really like you have no chance of changing anything tied to this technology yourself. So the only entities who could do something are authorities, for example, data protection authorities. So this is something where users really need to get help, and it doesn't help to just update something because it's not under their control.
Okay, thank you. That sounds a bit scary, since we don't have control about it. And especially since, as I was told, you only need very few geolocation data to identify a person. Fidel, do you have any information on that?
Well, on the geolocation thing, there have been some studies, and depending on the data set, with 4 points, you usually are able to identify anybody. But I would say that that is really for getting to identify, I think, was like 85% of the people. If you think about regular patterns, like going to school, going to the university, going to work on a normal work day, should be even easier to identify people based on where they are living, census data. So definitely geolocation data is quite interesting. I would also like to continue the discussion by my two colleagues. It's clear that we have a lot of personal information in our mobile phones, and even, let's say, a mobile phone is quite a risk today because of what Fukami was telling about baseband, SS7, etc. But I also would like to bring your attention to one, in my view, big misunderstanding. We refer to smartphones. And as we have seen, any kind of mobile phone is going to be kind of problematic for the security point of view. But I'm not totally comfortable with the name, because we are kind of reducing a very incredible, powerful computer we have with us to a phone. And I think that is also going against our security, because we are dealing with the security of these devices in a way we wouldn't do it with a laptop or on a desktop computer. And it's not only that we carry an incredible powerful computer, it's a very particular one indeed. It's totally portable, so we can and we carry on everywhere we go. On the other hand, it's so easy to lose, and it's very easy to be theft. And definitely, most of you may have already the experience of losing one of the devices. It's way more difficult to lose a computer that you have at your house. We do not turn off these devices ever. They're always on, and 99% of the time they are also connected to the internet. So, for example, when Fukami were talking about the possibility to do surveillance or to listen to your conversation, then you also need to take into account again, the device is usually always connected and is always on. There is no other computer in the history, I think, I don't know, maybe a space shuttle that has so many sensors integrated in itself. I mean, you have a MiG, you have 1 or 2 cameras at least, you have now NFC, near-field connectivity, you have Bluetooth, you have Wi-Fi that can be used as sensors too. Of course, you have GPS. It's really a very particular kind of risk we are treating here, and we are treating it like a purely consumer device that we do not really need to worry about. and even worse, we cannot, even if we want, worry about, because these devices are usually very close devices. The ones used by the majority are not allowing the user to do much, and not even thinking about accessing the hardware, as Fukami was mentioning for baseband or SS7. But if we apply the permission model of Android or the Google or the Wallet Garden of Apple, indeed, the amount of things we can do with our devices is restricted, and is totally controlled by those companies that, on the other hand, may be using our own data for their own profit. So I think that complementing what says before, for me, one of the biggest risks for the mobile devices right now is the misunderstanding about what kind of device indeed we are talking about. It's not a phone for me. Thanks.
Okay, so we have two contracting views here, with Fukami more focusing on the phone side of the device and Fidel more on the computer side. So the question is then obviously, since we sort of see, okay, it can collect a lot of data about us and God knows what, or whoever knows what people can do with this data, what is the implication for me as a normal person by doing that, besides people knowing who I am in the sense of where I go, where I live? But what else can happen to me just because people collect the data? Who of you would like to say something about that?
I can start. So I come from the IT security side, so this, like my view, is very heavily influenced from the way you look into it from the professional protection side, like the technical protection, and this is always about threat models. So the question is, when I want to protect myself from something, I need to know who is actually attacking me, or I need to have an idea who is doing that, and all my protection is based on, or my protection mechanisms are based on this knowledge. And it is very hard to protect against, let's say, for example, my telco provider. It's basically not possible, and telco providers include like all adversaries which are like from the state side, like either a state-sponsored attacker or police or friendly intelligence communities. So this is actually not possible to protect against them. But if I have, for example, my neighbor or a company, this is in fact possible to have some sort of protection. So, the question is what I really worry about. So if I say, okay, if I use apps, for example, on a smartphone, it might be more of a risk than just using a web browser, for example, because if I have an app, it can grab my email. My email is like tied to my phone. It's like a special identification number, really tied to like a piece of hardware. So this means I'm always identifiable, no matter what I change or what other filters I use. While if I have a web browser, it's not that easy to identify me just by my hardware. It's only like cookies. So I have like different possibilities for like different models to protect myself, and this is all based on what I think I need to protect against. That was not really an answer to the question.
Well, it was more like, okay, giving us an idea what I could possibly do to protect myself, in that I pay attention to all these things. We are unfortunately a bit under time pressure, so I would suppose we start with question and answers. If anybody of you has a question, there's the first person already.
Thanks a lot. Giedre Shadikaite from Trini from DG EAC. My question is purely from the perspective of the user. Applications are made to make our life easier, and they really do make our life easier. What choices as the users we have? Because basically once you want to install application or the update, you have to agree with the terms and conditions, which usually states access to your data, to your contacts, to your location, etc. And if we click no, basically we don't get the application. The solution was proposed to use Browser, but is it so friendly user and it really satisfies our needs? What we can do in this case? Thank you.
No, obviously it's not satisfactory since the Article 29 working group, I don't know if you heard about this, it's like the European Assembly of the Data Protection Authorities in Europe. They issued an opinion last 2 years ago about mobile application, and it just mentioned very clearly that this type of authorization in one block without enabling you to choose between authorization for access to your contacts, access to localization, access to your videos or pictures, for example, that was not the way to go. So, of course, there was just an opinion 2 years ago, issued 2 years ago, and so we now have to see whether the national DPAs will enforce this into the national enforcement policy that they will adopt. Another element relating the one-block authorization is that the new GDPR, so the new regulation, which is supposed to replace the Data Protection Directive, should address this issue in a legal way, saying that you should not accept with the same consent the use of the application and the use of your data, because that is not that clear, legally speaking, at the current time. So in the new GDPR, it should be, let's hope, clearer. So that should be an answer from the legislator of the European Union. But at the same time, at the time being, this was clearly stated by the Article 29 Working Party that this kind of one-block authorization should be avoided. So I hope it's going to be followed.
So what I like, for example, are like meta services, stuff like TOS DR, which is something like a service which helps you to understand what the terms and services actually contain. So it's like a list of social networks and other services saying, okay, they require you to consent with this and with this and with this, so that you actually have a choice, because I think the Facebook terms of services is larger than the Constitution. So this is really something where we need to have like an easier way, and it needs to be built into actually the terms and services like consent process. So I have no idea if this is like something that is really like going to come, but those media services actually really help to understand what's going on. And most of the time you have some type of choice. You can say, okay, I don't want to be part of, or I don't want to use this application because there's another one which is a little bit more user-friendly.
I also would like to, coming back to my discussion that you have a computer in your pocket, something in security that we also are really keen of is about reducing the attack surface, so that the most applications you have, the most sensors, the most features, the most things you have, the most possibilities for an attacker to get your device hacked. So if you have an application that may or may not be so useful, the terms and conditions are very long and not readable, and the permission it's asking is too much, you really need to consider, do I really need this application? Because then again, the more things you have in your mobile phone, the more at risk you are. So I really, really advise about, you can try something, but then you really need to evaluate if you need it or not. The most application you need to update, you need to worry about possible security problems, etc.
Okay, do we have other questions from the audience? The lady over there.
Hi, I'm Nevena Semova from EATEA. And I have a question about going back. So, considering that we have said accept too many times, what happens if we like to deinstall an application or deactivate an account? Is our data still the possession of the corporation in question?
Okay. You mean in theory or in practice? Okay. So I guess it's the last question. obviously, under the current framework, it's just they have science like it's the last one. So we can have discussion. There should be an application for the Q&A, like for further. But obviously, the current legislation and the new GDPR, the new regulation, should address this more specifically, because you're always free to retire your consent. So the consent is supposed to be able to be taken off, but at the same time, it is in theory, because in practice, it might be that what you consented before will still be in the cloud, will still be processed, and will still be in the big data, which is one of the issues of the big data. As you might know, when you've consented to something, you can't be, you consent can't have any, the withdrawal of your consent cannot have any consequence in the big data, because nobody will know anymore that it was your data that was processed. So in practice, that might be a little bit difficult to put into practice. But you always have the right to withdraw your consent, even on the application. And I think that if you uninstall the application, your consent and all the consents that you've put for this application will just be withdrawn. But once again, it's in theory.
Okay, with that, our panel comes to an end. So I want to thank again our panelists, and you can applause to them if you want. And I also want to thank the trainees of the EDPS who were organizing the whole event. So we have some here in the front. And so these are my lovely colleagues, Monica, Julia, Anna, the three in the front. And in the back you see the other three, Raza, Lara and Alvaro. So without them, this would not have been possible. So thank you to you. So I hope all of you enjoyed this event and that it helped you to get a new perspective on your personal data, and see you the next time.
Would it be any next time?
Maybe, I don't know, next data protection day?
Oh yeah? So it's just a one...